Section 7.2 is where you actually start getting into similar figures. So the first key concept box is talking about similar polygons. It says, two polygons are similar if corresponding angles are congruent and if the lengths of the corresponding sides are proportional. So what that means is if they tell you these two figures are similar, I know all of the corresponding angles should be equal to each other, and I know that when I set up a ratio between the corresponding sides, they should all have the same ratio when you reduce it. So what we're going to do is kind of practice finding if they're similar, and then practice also finding what that ratio will be. So the second part of this is just some definition type stuff. So the first one talks about an extended proportion. An extended proportion just means that I don't have two ratios set equal to each other, I have three or more. So that's all that an extended proportion would look like. And then the other piece is a scale factor. A scale factor is the ratio of the corresponding linear measurements of two similar figures. So what that means is, up here at the top when you were setting your corresponding sides equal to each other, when you reduce those lengths, that's going to be your scale factor. So that's showing you how they compare to one another. So like on this one down here, it's showing you when I compare BC to YZ, I would write 20 is to 8, and then I would reduce it, 5 is to 2. So the scale factor for these two similar figures would be 5 to 2. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is just practice doing some vocab. So it's telling me on this first problem that these two triangles are similar to each other. First thing it wants me to do is write the pairs of congruent angles. So some of you like to do visuals. The only thing is you want to make sure that, again, they're in the same orientation. So notice that this one would need to be rotated a little bit in order for you to match those up. So if I were to lay this on top of this triangle, they would match up with the same type of shape. If you remember when we did corresponding angles and sides, I went off the statement. So if they tell me these two figures are similar, then angle M has to be congruent to angle S. N has to be congruent to R. So the first positions are congruent, second positions are congruent, and third. So that's how I did it. So I won't go off of the picture unless I have to. So I would just go off by the statement. So I wrote M is congruent to S, angle N is congruent to R, and angle P is congruent to T. So then for the next question, what is the extended proportion for the ratios of corresponding sides? Again, you can use this visual over here to find the corresponding sides. I find it a little bit easier just to use the similar statement. So I would say side MN would be similar to side SR. So I would write that first one, and then I would just run through the rest. The second and third letters have to be similar to the second and third over here, and then first and third have to be similar to first and third. So that's all that is. So an extended proportion is just setting up your corresponding sides and those ratios. Okay, go ahead and flip the page and do the got it question. Okay, on the got it question, your pairs of congruent angles, did you match up D and H? If F and K, E and J, and G and L? And then for your extended proportion, did you do DE is to HJ, as EF is to JK, as FG is to KL, as DG is to HL? Okay, so that first problem is just practicing what are the corresponding sides, what are the congruent angles. The next part is where you're going to decide if your figures are similar or not. So, on problem 2, it's asking are they similar, and if they are, then you need to give the similarity statement and then also give the scale factor. So remember, my definition says I have to have two things. I have to have corresponding angles congruent, and I have to have corresponding sides proportional. So what that means is, let's check out the angles. So do I have all four sets congruent to one another? So I have M and W, I have two arcs there, I have a right angle, and then I have three arcs. So all four angles would be congruent to each other, okay? The second thing would be checking that ratio. So are your sides proportional? So that is where it's tricky. So you have to make sure that you're matching up corresponding sides. So if I were to line up this small one and place it on top of the big one, TW would line up with JM. So I know these two sides are corresponding. So I actually picked JK first and TU. So I would just set up that proportion. JK is 12, TU is 6, so 12 is to 6, so that means it's 2 to 1 as my scale factor. Then I would pick another set. KL is to UV. Those are corresponding sides. So I would set up that ratio. 24 is to 16. That reduces the 3 to 2. These scale factors all have to be the same if they're going to be similar. So since those are not the same after the first two, my answer would be no. These two figures are not similar to each other. So two things. One, do you have all the angles congruent to another set? And then two, are your sides proportional? So that's where you need to match up the corresponding sides and check to make sure the ratios are all the same. Okay, let's do another one. So step one, do I have all four angles congruent to each other? So I have one arc, two arcs, and three arcs. So yes, letter B, I would have all three angles congruent. The next step would be setting up my proportions. So notice that these two figures are not in corresponding positions currently. You cannot go off what they say up here because they don't say that this is similar. So you will have to rotate it a little bit if you needed to. So if I were to rotate it, this would have to flip or rotate around. So this would look more like D on the top, F over here, E over there, and then I could plug in my spots, so 20, 10, and 15. Okay, so then I just line up my pieces. It says AB is corresponding to DE, which is right, so now I have 12 is to 15, which reduces to 4 to 5. Then I would try the next set. BC corresponds to EF, so that would be 4/5 as well. And then I do my last set, 8 to 10, which also reduces to 4/5. So I would encourage you that for these particular problems, if they're not already lined up in their corresponding positions, rotate it, flip it, however you need to, draw it over here so that you can visually see which sides match to which sides. So notice that all of my angles are congruent, all of my sides are proportional. So this one is yes, they are similar to each other. If I say they're similar, I have to give the similar statement and the scale factor. So when I write out my similar statement, I have to make sure I line up my corresponding angles. So triangle ABC would be similar to triangle DEF because D corresponds with A, E to B, F to C. And then as far as your scale factor goes, that's just your number that you found for being the proportion. So I would write my scale factor as being 4 to 5. Alright, pause the video and see if you can do the next two angles, or the next two figures. Okay, so on letter A, I went ahead and flipped this smaller figure around so that I could see visually how they would compare to each other. I checked for my four congruent angles and I did have them all matching up. So then I checked for the sides to see if they were proportional. When I did KL and WZ, 10 to 15 reduces to 2 to 3. And then when I did the other pair, LM and WX, 15 to 20 reduces to 3/4. So this one I said was not similar because it was not proportional. Alright, letter B. I checked to make sure that I had all my congruent angles, which I did. They all matched up with another set. Then I started looking at my sides to see if they're proportional. So when I started setting them all up, I matched TS with EA, which is 6 over 12, which is 1 to 2. I matched SR with AB, which is 9 over 18, which reduces to a half. I matched RV and BC, so that was a half. And then the rest all end up being a half. Again, if you're struggling finding the corresponding sides, I would go ahead and redraw this small one or redraw the big one so that they're in the same direction. So if you flipped this around and put T over there, then I could still have S and U and R and V and then match up those corresponding spots from there. So I did say that this was similar because I ended up getting all of the same scale factor. So when I wrote out my similarity statement, I matched up my corresponding angles. So ABCDE is similar to SRVUT. So just make sure you go in the right direction. And then my scale factor is this number that you got when you found the sides proportional. Okay, so a lot going on with similar figures. You have to make sure that you have congruent angles. You have to make sure that your sides are proportional. The last piece then is setting up a proportion, which connects to what we did in the last lesson, to find a missing length. So here's my first one. It's wanting me to, find the value of x. So what I first did was I redrew these two figures since they're currently overlapping. So I drew the small one down here and I drew the big one over there. Since I'm a visual person, this was very confusing for me. So I went ahead and separated so I could see. So what you're going to do is you can set up a proportion to go ahead and solve for this. So if I'm going to find x, then I would want to see what is x corresponding to. Well, side FG corresponds to side BC. So I could set up that ratio. And then just find another set where you know both numbers. So I know side ED and I know it corresponds to AD and both of them have side lengths. So I could set up this proportion over here because remember their scale factor is going to be the same. So that's how you can set them equal to each other. So then I just plugged in my numbers. So x is to 7.5 as 6 is to 9 and then I solved using that proportion. So you could cross multiply 6 times 7.5 and then divide by 9 and your answer ends up being x equals 5. So a couple things when you're doing this. One, if the visual is confusing, separate them out. Two, when you get ready to set up your proportion, whatever letter you're trying to solve for, you're going to match up its corresponding side to. Three, you need to find a pair of sides that are corresponding that you know both lengths to in order to solve it. When you set up your proportion, make sure that when you go straight across, that these are on the same figure. So what I mean by that, FG and ED are in the same figure, so that's why they both are on top. If you flip these around, you're going to mess up your calculation. Okay, so pause the video and see if you can do the gotta question. So the gotta question is where you need to find what the value is for y. So I would find where y is, find my corresponding side. So I would do y is to 5, and then I already used the previous one, so I would use it again as 6 is to 9. So I would set up that proportion, and then I would solve it. 6 times 5 divided by 9. So depending on how you wrote it would depend on your answer. So 10 thirds, 3 1/3, or 3.3 repeating. Okay, a lot going on with similar figures. It's setting us up for the rest of this unit. So remember, congruent angles, corresponding sides have to be proportional. And then when you're doing those proportions, your scale factor is what you get when you reduce those ratios. Okay. If you have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, go ahead and start your assignment.